good evening, and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Hungary. Hungary is located in Central Europe. It's bordered over here by Slovakia to the north. It has this little border here with Ukraine. It has this long border with Romania. Definitely talk about that in its history. All the borders here are important, but anyway. There's also a border here with Serbia, a border with Croatia, a teeny border with Slovenia, and a border with Austria. So Hungary's main geographic feature is most definitely the Danube River, which you can see comes right through here and slices the country in half. It goes right through the capital city of Budapest, and yes, I know, it's pronounced Budapest. Don't come for me in the comments. I do know this. I just try to stick to American pronunciation since I'm American, and it just makes things a lot easier in terms of like all the other countries around the world. So I know it's pronounced Budapest, but in America we say Budapest. Not sure why. It's like a Paris, Paris kind of thing, you know. Budapest actually used to be 3 cities. There was Óbuda, Buda, and Pest, or Pest, whatever. That combined into one big city, Budapest. There's another big river that cuts through Hungary, though. It's the Tisza River. That goes right through here. Through this area you can see here called the Great Hungarian Plain. Hungary in general is a fairly flat country. There are some mountainy areas from the Carpathians up here that slice through this area, but they're not particularly super big or anything. The highest point is right here. I'm not sure how to pronounce. I believe it's Kekish. And you can see here it's only 1,000 meters high. So, you know, it's big, but not like a massive cliff, you know, huge mountain. So, for the most part, Hungary is fairly flat. The Great Hungarian Plain is very famous for its agriculture. And this area over here is also pretty flat-ish. It's known as the Pusa, and it's the equivalent of like the Pampas in South America, or kind of like the Great Plains in the United States, in that they have their own cowboys and culture, things like that. This area is dominated by Lake Balaton, the largest lake in Hungary, as you can see. It's pretty huge, and it is a thermal lake. It's the world's largest thermal lake, which means it's heated from the energy of the earth. And Hungary is covered in various hot springs. So Lake Balaton and the various hot springs are big vacation, relaxation destinations. All the lake activities you can imagine happen over here. And, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Let me check my notes real quick. Bum, 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 bum. I think I got everything that I wanted. It's a very small country. We'll talk about why in its history. And, you know, like Budapest, there are lots of things that are pronounced very differently, I suppose. Hungarian is notoriously a very complex language and very hard to pronounce. So I'm doing my best here. If I mispronounce something, I am literally trying my best. I'm not trying to disrespect Hungary or anything. I'm literally doing my best. And if you want, you can always put the correct pronunciation down in the comments. I don't mind that at all. I think it only benefits my channel. So don't be super angry. Just bring it up in the comments, and I'll be very thankful for that. Another big word that gets mispronounced is the name that the Hungarians call themselves, which in America and various other English-speaking countries, we say the Magyars, which is not at all how it's pronounced in Hungary. And let me see, I didn't write this down. The Hungarian word for Hungary is Magyarország, I think. Very, very different language. It's very unique. There's no other language like it in the world. There's some similar ones, but nothing that even really comes close. So, the Magyar people, Magyar, however you pronounce it where you come from, are the Hungarians. But they weren't the first people to come to live in Hungary. The Celts had various tribes throughout this area, and the Romans eventually came in and conquered in about 16 BCE. They established quite a few little territories. Mainly this area was known as Moesia, and over here was part of Dacia. Very famously, like most of Croatia was part of Dacia, but the Romans held claim. There's still some really cool ruins and stuff in Hungary. That all changed in about the year 430. The Roman Empire was already very much collapsing in the west by then, but in this age is pretty much when the Huns invaded, which, not positive, but I'm pretty sure that's where we get the English word for Hungary, I assume. The Huns invaded, led very famously by Attila the Hun, took over the area. They're very violent people, I think predecessors to the Mongols. Various other tribes, like the barbarians as the Romans called them, came into the area, like the Goths and the Vandals, eventually the Slavs, lots of different cultures, too many to mention, but eventually the Magyars came from what's believed to be now like northerny Russia. No one's really certain. And they were led by a man named Arpad. He came in the year 895, thought that the plains around here were pretty similar to their horsey nomadic lifestyle, and settled down and launched their attacks from this area. And they expanded quite a bit until they were stopped by the German King Otto I in 955, and they just stuck to the like Danube, southern Carpathian basin, pretty much. In the year 1000, their king, Stephen, was crowned officially king by the Pope, making him a Catholic king, and he spread Catholicism throughout his now official kingdom, like recognized by everyone else, not just as like this ragtag group of nomads. They were an official kingdom now. And King Stephen is a very, very beloved figure in Hungary. He's been canonized as a saint. He's Saint Stephen. However, in 1241, the Mongols invaded and did what the Mongols did. They sacked and pillaged and destroyed everything. The king at that time was named King Bela IV, and he ordered the country to be covered in various forts and castles to protect the country from any further invasion. And when the Mongols did come back in 1285, the Hungarians stopped them from invading. They were successful. In 1301, the Arpad lineage died out. So the Angevin dynasty of Anjou, kind of over there, took over. There were quite a few famous kings from this lineage. Just to name a few, there was Louis the Great. He really focused on expansion. He expanded out to the Adriatic over here in what's now Croatia and various other parts over here. I think this is when they got Transylvania, that's over here in Romania. There was also, there was Sigismund. He wound up becoming Holy Roman Emperor. There was also John Hunyadi, which I know that's not at all how you say that in Hungarian, but that's apparently how we say it here. He stopped an Ottoman invasion and defeated them very famously, pushed them back. But the most famous by far in English, we would say Matthias Corvinus, but I know in Hungarian it's Matthias. He did quite a few things. For one, he was a big patron of the arts. He loved philosophy and art and learning. He had a very famous library where you could read about anything in the world. But he was also a big military leader. His army was called the Black Army. They were very, very feared as they conquered even more land in this part of Europe. But after his death, the kingdom weakened, and the Ottomans saw that as an opportunity to take over, and they invaded in 1541, very famously defeating the Hungarian army in the Battle of Mohacs. They took over this half. They took Buda, but not Pest. So the Habsburg dynasty over here annexed the area, took it over before the Ottomans could. And, the Hungarian people here weren't very happy about either situation. It was pretty chaotic in that sense. There was an uprising against the Habsburgs between 1703 and 1711, led by a man whose English version of his name is Francis Rákóczi, and a very beloved figure. But that independence movement ultimately failed. However, an army known as the Holy League, which was like a combination of various European powers coming together, marched on this half and took the country back from the Ottomans by 1718. And it was like, well, what do we do about this country now? There's quite a few different movements, very different directions that the country could have gone in. There was a modernization movement by István Széchenyi. I think that's how you say his name, which I really hope, because he's considered like the big national hero of Hungary in a sense. But eventually a man whose name I have no idea how to pronounce, Lajos Kossuth. Again, let me know in the comments how well I'm doing. I'm sure I'm doing terrible. But he was leading like a big movement, anti-Habsburg, take back the country, blah, blah, blah. So the Habsburgs called on the Russians to help them retake the territory, which the Russians were very glad to do. The Tsar was pretty high and mighty at this time, had a huge, strong army. So they easily defeated him and retook the country. And in a way to figure out what to do about this country, they decided, well, we rule Austria, they rule Hungary, let's create Austria-Hungary. They created this kingdom in 1867, so it's essentially the emperors, in a sense, of the Habsburg dynasty also became kings of Hungary. It was a dual kingdom. And so it remained until World War I. The heir to the Habsburg Austria-Hungarian dynasty, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated in Sarajevo, an event which sparked World War I. So, of course, Austria-Hungary very famously fought against the Allies and lost very terribly. And in 1920, one of the greatest tragedies, according to Hungarians, occurred when the Treaty of Trianon was drawn up by the Allies to reestablish borders and essentially establish the border you see today. Now, remember that Hungary used to reach the Adriatic. They had pretty much half of Romania. So they shrunk the country considerably. They lost about 70% of their territory and about 66% of the population. So in the border areas here in Austria, Croatia, Romania, Slovakia, there are Hungarian communities, people who still are ethnic Hungarians but are citizens of these new countries against their will, becoming immigrants overnight by not even moving an inch. And that's considered like the greatest tragedy in Hungarian history. Although many other dark times were on the way, World War II was right around the corner. And the Germans promised Hungary that they could regain their territory, which they started giving to them as they started to conquer this area of Europe. So Hungary joined the Axis powers in 1941, which was a very bad time in terms of the Holocaust, and the Russians invaded. There was a huge battle in Budapest. Many people lost their lives during this event. And like I always say, I am not diminishing or glossing over this event to be, like more precise or anything, or just trying to curtail that in a way. This is an ASMR relaxation channel, and talking about horrific events, human tragedies, is not relaxing, at least in my opinion. So I honor those who lost their lives, especially during events like the Holocaust, for the Jewish and Roma population of Hungary. That was all but wiped out during this time. But we're going to just mention it and move on because it's not relaxing. Sorry for that loud sound. I don't know what that was. Anyway. So, in 1947, once the dust settled from World War II, the borders of Hungary were reestablished back to what they were in 1920, losing all that land that they had gained from the Germans. And since the Soviets, right, not the Russians, they are the Soviets at that time, were the ones who invaded and retook the city, they just sort of laid claim to it, and the Communist Party rose up during the elections, and it essentially became a satellite state. There were some very huge revolutions against communist/Soviet rule, mainly led by a man whose name I also hope I pronounce right as Imre Nagy. I really hope, because he's the other big national hero of this event, because or of Hungarian history, I mean, because the Soviets swept in and demolished that rebellion in the most horrible ways you can imagine, and Nagy is considered a martyr Hungarian hero. In 1956, after the dust settled from that revolution, they installed a man named János Kadar to be in charge of the country. He was a lot more like a liberal communist. He was a lot more lenient. He wasn't like strict communist leaders. I'm talking too fast. I have to slow down. He was a lot more democratic in a sense. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, oh my goodness, I cannot talk. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Hungary had an easy transition to their new statehood, and they had elections in 1990. And things have been very interesting politically in Hungary. In terms of human development, it's a slow and steady process, but they're definitely on the up and up since the fall of communism. There were a couple of interesting political events. Mainly in 2006, there were protests after the prime minister at the time was recorded in a closed parliament session, saying, openly admitting in a very lewd manner that he had lied his way to get elected, and said a lot of really mean things about Hungarians in his country. So people were very upset about that. And that really led the way for the opposition party to be elected. In 2010, Viktor Orban was elected, and he is still the Prime Minister of Hungary to this day. They just had an election in April 2022. He was re-elected. He's considered one of the more far-right, very anti-journalist, anti-immigrant, buddies with Putin and his little club of far-right world leaders, and very concerning in this day and age, as you can imagine. Hungary is a part of the EU, however, the European Union, which kind of contradicts someone's making a lot of noise, which contradicts the ideals of Putin and his little fan club, so it's pretty contentious on that front. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Hungary politically. But that's pretty much the history of Hungary. Let's flip through this book and I'll show you some really cool pictures of Hungary. Some really interesting sights to see. I had a friend who lived for a few years in Budapest, and she insists that it's the most beautiful country ever. Hi, Bethany. Anyway, some yummy watermelon. We've got, here is Budapest right here on the Danube. Let's see. Oh, this is a demonstration in Transylvania of the Hungarians that live there wanting some more autonomy. We've got a protest against Viktor Orban. And this is actually a protest against another even more far-right party who's anti-Jewish. So they're showing some Holocaust victims there. A very beautiful Budapest. You can see the Parliament building here. There'll be a lot more pictures of it later. And the countryside, there's the Danube River. Very beautiful and scenic. gorgeous farmland. And here's the big hot spring in Budapest. Looks very luxurious. The river's flooded in this case. And here's a really cool map of Hungary. You can really see the landscape here. And here's the other end of the Parliament building. Here's Lake Balaton. Very gorgeous and just one of those like fun lakes, you know. Some wild boars, look at the babies. Really cute. We've got some parts of Budapest, the Millennium Memorial. And here are some Roman ruins. The statue of Saint Stephen with his wife there. And there's Prince Arpad. And this just says it's an honor guard riding by. This is a monument to the Battle of Mohács, sorry. And let's see, so here is Francis Rákóczi with that rebellion. And here is Transylvania in Romania, where many, many Hungarians live. Still a big issue. Here's István Széchenyi. And here is the Austrian emperor being crowned King of Hungary. He's a very famous poet, Sándor Petőfi, I hope, who's like a literal national, like a literary national hero. That's the word I'm looking for. There's some Hungarians arriving at Trianon, which is in Versailles Palace in Paris, near Paris in France. And here's the Battle of Budapest, Soviet soldiers there. Here's a Holocaust memorial. These are cast from actual shoes of Holocaust victims. And here's János Kadar giving a big speech of some kind. And here's Viktor Orban, the current Prime Minister of Hungary. Here is one of the far-right leaders casting a vote. A protest against the new constitution. And this was the president when this book came out. Literally, you know, it's now June 2022, but I was about to say last month. They just elected a new president, so he's not president anymore. The Parliament. And here's the Parliament building. Very, very beautiful place. And this is the prime minister that was caught saying those things. And, yeah, things like there'll be protests. It's allowed to protest in front of Parliament. Sooner or later they'll get bored of it and go home. Saying things like that, making people very mad. Some yummy vegetables. This guy's got some garlic and he's very proud of it. A cargo ship going on the Danube. A vineyard, very, very scenic, beautiful, and an industry plant. They're making an automobile motor. And some tourists enjoying the scenery. A beautiful day. Here it says these are Greenpeace protesters protesting expansion of a nuclear power plant. Got some recycle bins. There's a tourist bus. It looks like they're checking the water quality of the Danube. Beautiful waterfall. This is the Vale waterfall. And here are some very, very famous caves in the Untitled National Park. Very proud little kid there. His face painted. A medieval festival. These are always so much fun. We have these where I live too. I actually got my ring that I wear at it was a Scottish festival. Real quick, because people do ask about this ring, is that first of all, it's a 5-pointed star. A lot of people ask if it's a Star of David. It is not. My mother was Wiccan. I no longer identify as Wiccan per se, but she very much did. And I went to the Scottish festival about 2 months or so after she passed and saw this and knew that she would buy it in a heartbeat if she saw it. So I did, and I've worn it ever since. That was in 2005. So yeah, it's kind of stuck on my finger now. These are some Hungarians in Transylvania, being very proud Hungarians. And a protest for Roma rights, a very famously like a, how do I say it? Like a discriminated against ethnic group. Nice glasses. This is in Szeged, which we're going to see more pictures of later. If you know, you know. There's a puszta farm, very traditional looking. And here are some Roma boys, it says, playing some football. Working hard in school. And a no smoking sign. We've got, oh, so there's a lot of like drinks that Hungarians drink. I'm going to do a Hungarian culture video in a few days. I would film it tonight, but I'm going to go through and learn how to pronounce everything correctly for that video. So we'll learn more about these drinks that I can't pronounce yet in that video. The crown of Saint Stephen. Very, very famous like objects for Hungarians. Very beloved. St. Stephen's Basilica. And here's a Calvinist church in Buda. Really pretty building. Here's a famous cardinal who spoke out against communism. And another statue of Stephen, King of Hungary. And I was reading about this. I guess this was established by King Stephen back in the day. Some examples of Hungarian. Let's see. The sign in English and Hungarian for the tourists. Ooh, some traditional clothes there. And a painting by this person. They'll talk about him more in a minute, but I'll try to remember how to pronounce his name. Famous poets. Balasi. So by a Hungarian. It's so hard. Here's a Nobel Prize winner for literature. And a famous singer, János Kobor, I think. Here's Franz Liszt. I know him. The first person to have a music fandom in Liszt Mania. The girls would go wild and screaming. And Bartók, very famous composer. So here's this painter again. Costa. I believe very famous artist. Really interesting life. This film director, Miklos. Yeah, I'm not gonna try, but my goodness, he's so excited to hold his film can. He's very proud of that film. Look, this is cool. This is a movie set to look like in New York City for the Hungarian film industry. That's pretty cool. And this is from Memento Park, which I think we talked about in Atlas Obscura. It's basically once the Soviet Union collapsed and there are all these Soviet statues everywhere, they just took them all and put them all in one park. Some handmade, like little tourist trinkets, I guess. Looks like little napkins or doilies in there, a place you can hold them, I think. The Rubik's Cube was invented in Hungary, by a Hungarian, I should say. Ooh, playing chess in the hot spring. That sounds so nice. Looks like fun. Famous footballer. Again, I'm not going to say his name. I really don't want to butcher it. And an equestrian rider. Oh, it's St. Stephen's Day, it says. Celebrating at the Parliament building there. Here's the festival at Mohacs. It's an end of winter festival. We'll talk about it in the culture video. One of those very bizarre European holidays where it's basically just dress up as a scary monster. It's weird how many of those there are. Some beautiful Easter eggs. I love how, like, in Central and Eastern Europe, they paint their eggs like that. It's so pretty. So here is the Szeged Music Festival, one of the biggest music festivals in the world. Ooh, that looks delicious. delicious looking cake being made. So, paprika is like the national favorite thing. It's crucial to Hungarian cooking. It says they put it in all of their food, including goulash, probably the most famous Hungarian dish. The big market. And some very delicious looking pastries. Man, Hungarian food looks so good. And this is a photo from the opening of the first McDonald's after communism fell. There are lines around the block for some Western food. Some more food. Look at this. Hungarian cold sour cherry soup. I'm not really a fan of cold soups, but that looks really good. And some chicken paprikash. I assume chicken paprika. And some egg noodles there. Looks really yummy. And here's another map of Hungary. And here's where it's located in the world. So that will be it for Hungary tonight. Like I said, there are going to be more videos coming throughout the rest of the week about Hungary. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out and watch me just stumble all over myself trying to say some of these words. I hope that it works out. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night. Good night.